Hello everyone, welcome to Caroline Nutrition. Episode 1, Inflammation, the starting point of all illness. I'm your host Ian Cath, and I'm the one with the interesting questions to help us have the best that food has to give, health, vitality and enjoyment. And to help us make sense of all the information that's out there, we're joined with Caroline Scott, dietitian and holistic nutritionalist, and the person with the answers to your questions. Hello Caroline, how are you today?
I'm good, thanks Ian. How's it going?
I'm well, thanks Caroline. It's finally good to be underway with this new podcast of ours, all about food and some of the things that you can help people with, to help people know about holistic nutrition. I know you have a lot of knowledge, so I'm looking forward to getting into it.
Cool, thanks. So am I. I mean, this is a new way of doing things for me. I'm used to reaching people through a blog or an email list or maybe even meeting them through a seminar or a presentation. But to actually be able to speak to them on a podcast, I think is actually quite new and sexy. Let's see how it goes. Yeah,
I'm looking forward to it too. And hopefully we'll be able to reach out to some people who normally don't have access to you, maybe even internationally. We're in Brisbane, Australia, so some things are going to be a little bit Australian-centric, of course, but when it comes to nutrition, we're a big global family. So today we're talking about inflammation. Why have you chosen inflammation to get underway with as the starting point?
You want the honest answer? Well, no. Well, the reason I chose inflammation, because let's face it, there's 1,000 topics out there around nutrition and health and well-being, but it's my latest thing. You know what it's like. We've all got a latest thing, and I've been through so many different subjects and topics. Inflammation is something I've found myself talking to a lot of my clients about recently. So I thought, right, let's start with inflammation, because I think a lot of people don't actually realise what inflammation is and how they're affected and the long-term consequences. So when I'm talking to clients face to face, so often we hone all of their little problems down to one thing, and that is that at the base of all of their discomfort and symptoms and disease, they have chronic inflammation. And so I just thought it would be really great to kind of throw the topic out there, discuss a little bit, so that people have a better understanding of what inflammation is, and that pretty much everyone listening to this, yes you, absolutely everyone listening to this, has some form of inflammation in their body right now. And I think it's important we have a better understanding of how to treat this. So that's why, the first topic, inflammation.
Well, until you brought up this idea of inflammation, I had never ever heard of it. How do you explain it? What is inflammation? It's never been on my radar as far as health and nutrition.
No, I understand that. I think most people would relate to what you just said. The majority of people don't think of inflammation as being a dietary or health and well-being issue, and that's the problem. So inflammation is a process that happens in the body. So it's not like you go out and you catch a cold or the flu or something, but it's a process that's happening in the body that leads to disease. And so all of our disease states, as humans, all of our disease states start at the very basis with inflammation. And this is happening on a cellular level with our tissues. So it's not something you necessarily can feel or see or touch. I mean, there are different forms of inflammation in the body, and the body has different ways of inflaming itself in order to protect itself. So think for a minute. Just think about this in a different way. A different type of inflammation that we're all really familiar with is, supposing you were to cut yourself on your hand or your arm for whatever reason, so you've broken the skin and there's a nice long slender cut and there's blood oozing through. So the first thing that happens immediately, apart from us rushing off to try and get it fixed and yelling and screaming, once all the hullabaloo has died down, you treat the cut in some way. But the body has already reacted. Within moments of you cutting yourself, it's released hormones and chemicals through the blood, rushing to that site to start inflaming the site, which keeps it clean and keeps bacteria out and helps the blood to clot, to form a scab over the cut. And within a few hours, you'd have a scab forming, we hope, unless you're on some sort of medication that thins the blood too much, and then you might just bleed out. But hopefully that doesn't happen. So you formed a scab over the cut. But now that area around the scab has probably, and you'll have noticed this yourself if you've ever had the misfortune to do this, is the area will get hot and it will get red. And after a few days, once the scab's formed, it might even be quite itchy because everything underneath the scab and everything around that area is working to actually repair that in the body. And this is a type of inflammation. And we don't think about it as inflammation, we just see it as the healing process, because after a few weeks, that scar's probably gone. And you won't even notice that you'd cut yourself. The body is such a powerful healing tool. It's amazing.
Well, I've noticed personally some forms of inflammation. This is what I first think of, is something like I might roll an ankle and it'll become red and inflamed. Now, that's what I traditionally think of inflammation. But how is that different to the nutritional side of things? Okay,
well, it is and it isn't really. It's a very similar thing is happening in the body. So when you've rolled your ankle and you've suddenly got a whole bunch of blood and different things rushing to that ankle to try and protect it and to try and immediately start repairing any kind of damaged tissue, you're going to get a swelling of fluid into that area. So that creates this idea of you've suddenly got a swollen ankle, which is inflammation. But in the swelling of that ankle, it's cushioning the damaged part of the ankle so you don't do any more damage. And this is just one way of the body responding to an injury or an insult. Now, the inflammation that I'm talking about in terms of the basis of common diseases is slightly different. It's still the body's reaction, but this is happening on a cellular level. So you've got to think cells are things that we can't see with the naked eye. So you're looking at this under the microscope. So this is happening microscopically, that there are certain, let's say, insults that happen to our body. Now, we might eat these insults, or we might breathe them in. They might be toxins or chemicals around us, or they're foods and substances that we've brought into the body. And once they get down to a cellular level, they've escaped the digestive system, they're in the blood, they're now at the tissues. And because they're not really supposed to be there, they're damaging the tissues and they're damaging your cellular linings, and they start to break down the linings of each little cell. Each little cell in our body has got it's got what we call a phospholipid lining. So think about it, it's a bit like oil and water. If the inside of your cell is watery, in actual fact, to be able to differentiate it from the cell next door, it's got a little oily lining around it. That all makes sense, doesn't it? So they all sit next to each other and they don't all float into each other. So they need some sort of some lining. So when that lining starts to break down and is damaged, you leak the contents of your cell out into the interstitial fluid, which is all the little fluid that sits around the cells. They all sit bathed in this fluid. And so the cells start to break down. And when that happens, you've got inflammation happening. Again, the body will call on it, on the immune system, to try and repair the damage that's happening. So all sorts of alarm systems are going off in the body. We just don't know about it at this stage because it's maybe 2, 10, 20 cells, which is not even the size of your thumbnail. It's so tiny. So at this point, you've got no idea that anything is happening. And that will keep going. So if the inflammatory event keeps going and if the insult keeps going, eventually it becomes an area that you start to notice. And this is where we get symptoms. Inflammation is something that happens generally over years, even decades. So it's not something you're going to wake up with and go, oh, I've got inflammation. It's something that happens because we're stuck in our habits, our lifestyle habits, for years and years and years and years.
So you wouldn't even necessarily know that you're inflamed?
That's right, you wouldn't know until you start to feel the symptoms.
And could the symptoms be so subtle that you actually just think this is life?
Absolutely. It's what I see commonly, that people have symptoms on a daily basis that they think are normal for them.
For example?
Because a headache, a gut ache, aches and pains in your joints, in your muscles. Many people put a lot of these symptoms down to aging.
Like arthritis?
Not quite. Yes, to start with. Yes, arthritis becomes a condition, but it starts as inflammation. So initially, before you feel or before you get a diagnosis of arthritis, you'll be feeling a lot of discomfort, pain, aches. So it's something that develops over time when you don't actually put a stop to it. It takes a long time to actually develop into a symptom that you can put your finger on. But many people will exist with some of these smaller symptoms that just because it happens to them on a daily basis, they think that's normal for them. when it's not. And that's what I have to point out. It is not natural for us to experience headaches daily. But it might be if you're deeply inflamed, or if you're completely dehydrated, or if you're a smoker and you don't do anything about your smoking and you just keep on smoking and you've got all the windows in your house shut and you end up and you wonder why you've got headaches every day.
So we're primarily talking about diet and nutrition. How does that cause inflammation? Because it doesn't seem like it's nothing like rolling an ankle or cutting myself.
No, true. But in the body, internally, when you consistently take on board foods and substances, and what I like to call my food lookalike substances, they're not necessarily really food, and when you consistently put these into the body, they create damage on a cellular level. So they've gone through the digestive process, they're in the blood, and they're causing damage on a cellular level. So certain foods we know cause inflammation in the body. And there's been lots of research, and more recently there's been some fairly exciting research on this around certain foods that we know will create inflammation.
For example?
You're begging to ask that. So the biggest one that off the top of my head, and that the majority of people I see will suffer from, is gluten. And I hear a whole bunch of people now moaning, oh no, she's going to go on about gluten. I know everyone seems to be a little bit saturated with thoughts around gluten at the moment, but we know gluten, being the protein portion of certain grains, including wheat and rye, barley, etc., is very inflammatory in the body. And if your body particularly has a problem with it, you're causing inflammation that you have no idea about. And I'm not talking about being a celiac here or suffering from celiac disease, which is an allergy to gluten, and that's slightly different. Many of us have an intolerance, or our body finds there's an inflammatory response to gluten. And it may or may not give you an immediate response. Generally, I find clients who have a whole bunch of common symptoms, and they are symptoms that come about through inflammation. And when we remove things like gluten from the diet, these symptoms go away.
Okay, so gluten's protein. I understand that.
Yeah.
But there are a whole heap of other proteins out there. Do they all have a similar response? Can they all have the same impact on a body?
Sure, they could. The majority of them don't, but some of them could. As proteins, proteins are fairly hectic molecules for our body to break down. But when your gut's pretty healthy, it shouldn't have a problem with these heavy-duty proteins. We just know gluten is slightly different, and there's a number of reasons for that, and there's a number of theories out there about that, and maybe that particular issue is for another time. Definitely. Because it's a whole conversation on its own.
It's huge. But what other proteins are a bit of a problem like this? Just the top 5, maybe.
Okay, well, actually, I'm not sure there are 5 even. The other one that I would really alert people to is casein, which is the protein that comes from dairy.
Right, this is different to the sugar that's in dairy.
Oh yes, that's a sugar. That's lactose is a sugar. I'm not talking about the sugars either. It's
because some
protein.
people are lactose intolerant.
Yes.
But they could also be casein intolerant.
They could, and many people could be lactose intolerant but not casein intolerant, and vice versa. So it's very important that you get clear about what problem you have, rather than just removing a food from your diet and not being sure why. So I'm usually quite clear with people. There's a set of common symptoms that come with the dairy protein. And so normally I'm quite confident when I ask people to eliminate it for a few weeks from their diet. It's not necessary forever, just so that we can get an understanding of whether that food really is impacting them. But on a deeper level, when we look at inflammatory foods, the other things in our diet, or let's say in our landscape for diet and nutrition, are some of those processed foods. So these are foods we're not really used to. They haven't been around for long enough for our body to evolve with. And they generally have molecules and chemicals that our body doesn't understand and doesn't recognize as real food, natural foods.
For example?
Okay, there's so many I could name. But all right, for example, damaged fats. So fats, things like vegetable oils that have been created out of nuts, seeds, real whole foods, and they've been put through such intense processing that we've now created molecules that the body can't recognise.
Like margarines.
Margarines is a classic one. Canola oil, God, I hate that stuff. Or if you go down the local chippy and you want to have fish and chips that are generally deep fried, no longer today are they deep fried in dripping. In dripping or lard or that any kind of animal product. They're now in some sort of really nasty vegetable oil, cottonseed oil often, which is really quite toxic. So when you eat...
So we're not talking about the aspartames, the hardcore chemical replacements. No, but we're talking about things that have been modified from what was once decent food into something that's no longer decent. Either through temperature or chemicals or something.
Well, the whole chemical processing has changed it. So it's changed the molecular structure. So it's no longer recognised anywhere near as a natural food. And so when you bring those molecules into your body and your body tries to assimilate them, it can't. And this is what happens. They get down to that cellular level and they start this process of breakdown, of inflammation, of degradation of the cell linings. And because we eat these foods commonly, so this is not just occasionally, but for some of us relatively regularly, we are creating this constant chronic inflammation.
And this is what leads on to all these other conditions that people suffer from.
Yeah, very much.
So just give us a list of the sort of things that people are maybe feeling out there in their world that they don't even know comes from inflammation.
Well, as I was saying earlier, things like headaches, joints, aches and pains, brain fog, memory loss. They're even now talking about Alzheimer's being basically an inflammatory condition.
So if this is the basis, if this is the fundamental, is this where the effort needs to be put to fix these issues that people have?
Yeah, of course, always. It's about prevention, always. So we've got to start looking again at our diets and start to really challenge ourselves. Why are these food-like substances in our diet on such a regular basis? We need to bring our diets back into a more healthy line so that we're taking on board natural foods, fruits and vegetables and meats, nuts and seeds, without eating processed foods, particularly at the level we're eating them at.
So is that all there is to it? We can wrap this whole series up in this one episode by saying just eat natural foods. End of conversation. Thank you very much. Let's move on.
Yep. If you want a word, yep, it totally is. It's about just eat real food. If we just did that and we just drank water, we wouldn't have any of the conditions that we're suffering with today. And I know that's a big statement, and I know there's going to be people out there listening. Is there anyone listening out there? But if there are people out there listening, I reckon there'll be a lot of people who'll be upset by that and who will dispute what I've said. And that's fine. Send us your comments, bring it on, because I'd like to discuss that with you further. It really is that simple.
Okay, but in this world, most people have a glass of wine, maybe they smoke, they work in a somewhat toxic environment, they're dealing with pollution in traffic, that they are in an environment that could cause all sorts of conditions, not to mention harming themselves with exercise or harming themselves through not exercise. We have to negotiate this, so we have to work in the environment that we're in. And some people lead busy lives, so they reach for a bit of convenience food. So it's not always going to be the utopian world that you suggest.
No, of course not. But then we need to be more responsible, hey, because it's if you're following a particular habit or pattern or behaviour, you've got to pick up the consequences for that. So you love your fish and chips on a Friday night, great, enjoy them. But the consequence is that you're inflaming your body, and potentially in a decade you'll have an inflammatory condition. Yeah, I get it, that you're giving me that look. I understand. People really struggle with this type of thing. It's straight talking, because this is the reality of it. Sure, there are anti-inflammatories out there that you can take, and there are foods that you can make sure that you have in your diet in ample form that will help to negate the inflammation. But you can't beat it. You can't negotiate with your body and say, oh, look, I just love these hot chips. Please don't get inflamed this time. I mean, that's just crazy. I think if people have a better understanding, and this is one of my passions, is I really want people to have a better understanding of their body and how it works and the biochemistry that goes on when we eat food. It's a chemical experiment every time we stick anything in our mouths. And if people had a better understanding, they might make different choices. It's not up to me to persuade people to eat different foods. It's none of my business, really, what people are eating. I can only be responsible for my own food intake. But I really want to share the knowledge that I've been fortunate enough to gain. If people had more knowledge, they would make different choices on a regular basis, and that might be just enough to save them some pain and aggravation later.
Okay, Caroline, well, that's all well and good, but you as a practitioner have to deal with people who live in the real world and who have done this harm through inflammation to their bodies, and they have to negotiate their way out of this. How do you do that?
Yeah, every day I see this, and what excites me is when people do actually come to seek that kind of advice. I love it because then you really get to share the information that helps them to turn their whole lives around, because they get to understand more deeply what they're doing with the food choices they're making. So we go on and we really explore what food choices they could make, just in terms of the things that they could add to their diet and to their lifestyle on a regular basis to turn this whole situation around, and not just turn it around, but to reverse it. So you can reverse inflammation if you use the right foods, the right lifestyle choices. It's not like a life sentence you have to live with. You can make different choices on a daily basis, and they can be really simple choices. This will actually lead us on to talking about some of the subjects we're going to cover in the future. I really want to cover the idea of Alzheimer's. It's something in the community, I think, that's scaring us a little. The statistics we've been told about Alzheimer's recently. Mental health issues, for example, depression. There are so many people on antidepressants. What role does nutrition and diet play in these disorders? And I think it would be really fabulous if we could cover these topics in the future.
So that's what we're going to be doing in the future, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to be exploring all of these different aspects of nutrition and diet and lifestyle and how to live a better, richer, fuller life, because heck, that's what I want. I'm sure that's what you want out there as well. And I know Caroline lives this life as well. So this is what this show is all about. We're going to go deep into all of these topics over a number of episodes. So really the take home from this, Caroline, is
just eat real food.
And we're going to go deep into what that really means and the impact that that's going to have on your life. But we also want to know what is happening in your life. So it'd be really wonderful to hear from you. This is just episode 1, but there are many different ways you can get hold of us. All through the site at carolinenutrition.com. You can contact me on Twitter. I'm at IanCath on Twitter, and Caroline is CJR Scott on Twitter. And if you want to send us an email, it's contact@carolinenutrition.com. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear your individual stories and questions. We're really curious to know what questions you may have.
I'd love to hear any questions that people have got out there, or issues that they're struggling with that they don't mind if we stick it up globally and dissect it and talk about it and then throw it back at you.
And as I mentioned at the top, everybody, we're here in Australia, Brisbane as a matter of fact. And Australia has been known for introducing the world to some culinary delights that maybe you're not aware of. Do you know what I'm talking about, Caroline?
You are going to say something disgusting
No,
like
I'm not going to talk about Vegemite. We introduced to the world, maybe the Kiwis helped, to flat white coffees, and the world knows all about a flat white coffee now. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the avocado smash, which is something that's popped up in the last 10 or so years here in Australia.
One of my favourites.
And it is wonderful. And we promised a recipe for you all. And I would like to suggest you have a crack at this, ladies and gentlemen. What you do is you get some really good bread, maybe sourdough, toast it up, and then you get an avocado, maybe even an entire whole avocado if you feel like a bit of a pig, but, you know, half an avocado, and smash it onto your...
Your brain will love you.
Yes.
A whole avocado.
Yes, smash it onto your toast, and then I prefer to make a bit of a salsa up. So just a simple red onion, tomato, bit of parsley, maybe Italian parsley, some salt and pepper, a bit of lime juice.
No garlic?
maybe garlic if you want to. I don't always worry about garlic, but a little bit of lime juice and a bit of olive oil mixed in with the salsa, and then drop that all on top of the avocado. For breakfast, ladies and gentlemen, I think it's awesome.
I know my family in the UK won't understand the term smash an avocado.
Well, it just means you just scoop the avocado out and drop it on the toast and mash it up onto the toast.
Right.
So the avocado is smashed on the toast. Beautiful Sunday morning brunch here in the subtropics, which is something I particularly like to make up, or if I'm out visiting a cafe, have for breakfast. I think it's one of the little gifts that we have given the world is the avocado smash. Try it sometime, people. You might just like it, especially if you're in the Northern Hemisphere. You're starting to move in towards summer now, so it's a good summer breakfast meal. But that's just about wrapping up today's show, everybody. We'd love to hear from you. What are we going to be talking about next time, Caroline?
We're going to talk about arthritis. We're going to explore how diet and lifestyle choices can impact our body, and the outcome often is arthritis. I just have so many clients with this condition in some form or another that I think it's really important we get some different information out there.
And I'd imagine arthritis is the pointy end of the condition, but there's probably a lot of precursors that even younger people feel.
Yes, very much. And there are different forms of arthritis, and we can clarify those next time. But you're right, arthritis is the end of a condition that's been going on for quite some time, because it's an inflammatory condition that's been underlying for probably a decade.
Well, that's it for next time, and for this time it's all over, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for hanging around for episode 1. It's been interesting and challenging and fun putting this first episode together. We hope you come back for many more episodes. It's easy for you to get all the links to listen to the podcast, to subscribe over at carolinenutrition.com. But you can also find us in iTunes and any of your podcatching software that you may be out there using, along with SoundCloud and many other places on the social web. Come and check us out. Send us a few comments. We'd love to hear from you. Talk to you next time, everyone. Bye-bye for now.
Goodbye for now.